What's a nice Jewish girl doing in a place like this? Perhaps I do have a story to tell. It's part of the Jewish history of Santa Fe. My grandparents came to Albuquerque in 1905 to work with my grandfather's relatives, the Rosenwald Brothers. And then they came to Santa Fe and opened up a department store, which is quite remarkable when you think of how it must have been then with dirt roads and, well, I guess there was maybe a population of 15,000. I don't know exactly, but anyway, it was a very small town. This is the exact location that my grandparents started the store in 1912, the year New Mexico became a state, and it was called the White House. And they ran the business. And she bought this building from the Catrins in 1927. When my mother and father were married in 1921, my father opened up the shoe store, which was right next door to my grandmother's store, and he called the shoe store the Guarantee. And then Abe and I and my brother ran the store after we were married. My grandmother loved to play poker, and that Saturday night, their friends would get together, and then my grandmother went to New York to shop, and sometimes she'd be gone for a month, because you couldn't have. It was such a small town that you couldn't have more than one dress alike, even if it cost $2.98. There was a story she told about a judge's wife. Her name was Mrs. Wright. And one day she was walking by the store, and she saw a dress in the window. And she came in and she said, "Mrs. Blatt, you'll have to send that dress back. I just bought one just like it in El Paso." When Ron and Gloria asked me to talk about my religious experiences, I wondered if I had a story to tell. I began to think about my childhood and having been born and raised in Santa Fe, and realized that my life, both religious and social, was quite different. In retrospect, I realized that it was non-traditional, but quite a wonderful way to grow up. At that time, there was no temple, no rabbi, no religious school. In fact, there was no formal Jewish religious life. There were about 10 Jewish families who made up the community. Names like Gans, Livingston, Teichert, Kahn, Kempenek, Bell, Pick, and my family, the Blatts and the Pacheskis. The families held services in their homes, but not on a regular basis. My father, who had grown up in New York and had studied to be a cantor, often led the services. I never hear the Kol Nidre that I don't think of him. He was very active with the Jewish community before we had a temple or rabbi and that sort of thing. When someone died, it was difficult to find a minyan to say Kaddish. How then does a child growing up during that time in Santa Fe have a sense of religious values? But despite the lack of formal education, I always had a deep sense of my own religion. I used to laughingly tell my folks that I had to fight for my religion. Later, the rabbis from Albuquerque came up about twice a month, and I was confirmed at Temple Albert. Then I taught religious school, along with other members of the community, in the basement of the Baptist church. Santa Fe was truly, and still is, a utopia in many ways. I loved growing up here, where there was no prejudice and it never seemed to matter what you had, but who you were and what you had to offer as an individual. Santa Fe was a fun place. It still is, but I mean, everybody knew everybody. There was something going on all the time. My first introduction to the outside world of Jewish life was when I left Santa Fe to attend college at Sophie Newcomb in New Orleans. That was a real eye-opener. It was a surprise for me to learn that I could only be rushed by a Jewish sorority, and that generally speaking, all of the Jewish students were pretty much ghettoized, a far cry from Santa Fe. But it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because not only did it teach me about the outside world, but it was there that I met and later married Abe Silver, my husband of 64 years. We were married in Santa Fe in my grandmother's home by Rabbi David Shore from Albuquerque. There was no temple here to be married in. And we had 3 children who now have all returned to Santa Fe. They've all left, but they're all back. When we returned to Santa Fe in 1952, the cornerstone was laid for the temple that we now know as the Upper Sanctuary. Well, it was the first Jewish temple in Santa Fe, and it was designed by John Gaumim, and it would hold 100 people, and we thought that would be as big as we'd ever need. We were finally able to hire an almost full-time rabbi, and that was Rabbi Leonard Hellman. And soon we were bursting at the seams, and a drive was started to raise money for a new temple. I will never forget walking into the synagogue after it was completed. I was totally overwhelmed to think that our tiny little congregation had grown to that size, and to see this magnificent edifice in my little town just blew me away. It filled me with such pride that it's hard to explain. And I now realize that I'm the last living person who started the temple. Santa Fe has changed. It has grown in many ways, and it has become more sophisticated and diverse. Our Jewish community has expanded beyond belief. I wouldn't for the world trade growing up and living in Santa Fe when I did, and I feel blessed for my eclectic upbringing. I feel especially blessed that I have such a great sense of belonging and belief, not only for our community, but to the Jewish religion as a whole.